Hi again, everyone. I'm here to make a quick response video to Matt Easton. He recently made a video that's entitled, I believe, the best historical fighting, how's it phrased? The best and most affordable antique military sword, something to that effect. Now, I'm not going to disagree with anything he said in that video. In fact, go ahead and check it. We'll post a link to the video that Matt Easton posted below. But basically, he was trying to point people at a sword that if you're interested in collecting an actual fighting sword from the military period, the modern military period, an overlooked example, which is the 1896 pattern cavalry officers, the 1896 pattern cavalry officers sword. that's a mouthful, which is a very, very neat fighting weapon, and is there's still enough available that if you're interested in picking up an example, you can find one, and is a perfectly useful fighting weapon. And he went on to some length explaining why it was such a good example of a fighting tool, because there's plenty of examples that we can look throughout history, especially during the so-called modern period, where we're talking about patterns of weapons, where there's examples that we would consider clunkers, where there were compromises taken and the pattern was too much in one direction and compromises were taken away from its ability to thrust with the hatchet point, or it was too focused on giving point, and then the cutting ability of the sword was compromised. But it uses the Wilkinson 1845 pattern blade that was seen on earlier swords. I myself don't have one at hand, but I've handled many of them in the past, and again, they come in a variety of different configurations, some with more curvature, some with less curvature, some a bit longer, some a bit shorter. But it's a very neat compromise cut and thrust design. And as he was discussing it, I was reminded, that 1845 Wilkinson pattern was very popular because in many ways it was a good in between. It offered the kind of the best of both worlds, with the spear point on the end and a nice backsword belly and a fuller to make it lighter. It had a kind of jack of all trades where it didn't really have to give up a lot for everything that it enabled you to do, and it was a very comfortable officer's weapon. However, it reminded me of something. So my personal pet period of study is with very, very early sabers, the birthplace of sabers. Some of you may have seen this in some of my other videos. I haven't done a dedicated video to it, but this is a replica from Hanwei, and it's called the Saber of Charlemagne, the so-called Saber of Charlemagne. It was at one point attributed to Charlemagne himself. It is a replica of a sword found in the KHM in Austria, and this sword probably dates to around the 12th century, not from Charlemagne's time, but from time later. And it's one of a type of swords that are collectively referred to as Turko-Mongol sabers. They start from, let's say, maybe the 8th century and continue into the 13th century, and there is some variation in their design. They can be very long at times. This one is a kind of medium to small length. And these nomad sabers belong to people of the Asian and Eastern European steppe, belong to a variety of nomadic people groups that inhabit the region. And in many ways, this is kind of the birthplace of where sabers come from. So I'm going to have a dedicated video later that talks about this and the influence it has with all the other types of sabers that we know and love. But if we pull out the sword from its scabbard real fast, does this look familiar to anyone? So even though this saber is almost 1,000 years old, we start off here with a very, very straight, almost backsword design that ends in a very gentle curve and a spear tip with a nice little fuller running down the middle. It is very, very similar to the 1845 pattern that was developed in the middle of the 19th century. This particular example does feature a yeoman. It's one of the earlier examples of the yeoman that is typical of Turkic swords. but it has a nice spine. It's got about a 29-inch blade, so it's a little bit smaller than some of the other examples, but it is very easy to point. It has a wonderful ability to thrust with, and it's very maneuverable in the hand. It's got some nice rayskin grip here. That's my particular example is used, so it's looking a little dirty. But this is a very fast and nimble sword, and it's very interesting to me that after we're looking at, let's say,
Well,
all right, we'll be generous. We'll say that it only was 700 years of sword design. We started with the saber, and then we came to the evolution of saber design to return to something that was very similar to what we started with so many years ago. So just a funny little anecdote talking about a saber that's kind of near and dear to my heart, something from the Magyar period that is very reminiscent of the Wilkinson 1845 officer's saber. Anyway, until next time, guys, take care.